It was a quiet night in the small city of Cedar Ridge. The air was cool, and a light fog covered the streets. Officer Mark Reynolds sat inside his patrol car with his loyal K-9 partner, Rex, a trained German shepherd, known across the department for his sharp instincts and calm nature. The city seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. Streetlights flickered softly and the sound of the engine's hum filled the silence. For Mark, nights like these were both comforting and strange. Experience had taught him that calm nights often hid something waiting to happen. Rex sat beside him, alert and still, his golden brown eyes scanning through the misty windows. Every now and then, his ears twitched at the faintest sound. A passing car, a door closing, the distant bark of another dog. Mark smiled and reached over to pat Rex's head. "You feel it too, huh, buddy?" he whispered. Rex let out a small whine and wagged his tail, once before turning his gaze back toward the empty street. It had been nearly 5 years. Since Mark started working with Rex, their bond had grown stronger with every call, every chase, every long night spent searching for clues. Mark often said Rex was more than just a partner. He was his best friend. There were days when Rex's instincts had saved not only others' lives, but Mark's too. That trust was the kind of thing only built through time and shared danger. The radio on Mark's shoulder crackled suddenly, breaking the calm. Unit 12, possible break-in near 5th and Alder. Abandoned alley next to the old print shop. Please respond. Mark straightened up immediately, his calm replaced by focus. He switched on the car's siren briefly to clear a path, then turned it off as he neared the location. "All right, Rex," he said softly. "Looks like we've got something." Rex barked once as if confirming the order. The streets grew narrower as they approached the old industrial area. It was a part of town people avoided after dark. The print shop had been closed for nearly a decade, its walls covered in faded graffiti, its windows boarded up. A dim streetlight buzzed overhead, throwing weak light across the cracked pavement. Mark parked at the mouth of the alley and stepped out, his boots crunching on broken glass. He looked around, scanning the shadows. "Let's check it out, boy," he said, unclipping Rex's leash. Rex moved quietly beside him, his nose close to the ground. The night was still except for the distant dripping of water from a pipe. They walked deeper into the alley. Trash bins were lined against one wall and the air smelled of damp paper and rust. A cat darted out from behind a dumpster, making Mark flinch for a moment. Rex didn't react. He was too focused on something else. Then, without warning, Rex stopped. Completely. Mark froze mid-step and turned to look at him. The dog's body was stiff, his ears pointed straight ahead, his breathing shallow. His gaze was locked on the dark end of the alley where the light didn't reach. "Rex?" Mark whispered. The dog didn't move. Not even a blink. Mark's hand instinctively went to his flashlight. He clicked it on and aimed the beam into the darkness. The light cut through the fog, revealing wet pavement, old boxes, and cracked walls, but nothing unusual. Still, Rex refused to move. A chill ran through Mark's spine. He had seen this behavior before. Rex only froze like this when he sensed something serious, something that human eyes couldn't yet see. "Easy, boy," Mark murmured, stepping closer. "What do you see?" Rex slowly lifted his head, sniffing the air. Then he growled softly, a low rumble that echoed off the alley walls. The sound was deep, cautious, not aggressive. Mark's flashlight flickered for a second, the batteries struggling. The weak light danced across the walls, making shadows twist and stretch. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the papers near the dumpster. Everything around them suddenly felt heavy and watchful. Mark crouched beside Rex, trying to see what had caught his attention. He couldn't shake the strange feeling that they weren't alone. The silence of the alley was unnatural now, almost pressing against his ears. The radio buzzed again, startling him. "Unit 12, what's your status?" He pressed the button and whispered, "Unit 12 here. We're checking the alley near 5th and Alder. Something doesn't feel right. Stand by." "Copy that," came the dispatcher's calm reply. Rex began to move again, slowly, carefully. His paws barely made a sound as he led Mark toward the far end of the alley. Mark followed, keeping the flashlight steady. His mind raced through possibilities. A trespasser, maybe someone hiding. But why would Rex react so strongly if it was just a person? The deeper they went, the colder the air felt. There was a faint sound now. Something like a light tapping, but it was hard to tell where it came from. Mark paused and listened closely. The sound stopped. Rex turned his head sharply to the right, staring at a stack of old boxes near a broken fence. His growl deepened, Mark's pulse quickened. "You found something?" Rex took one step forward, nose twitching. Mark raised his flashlight again, the beam landing on the boxes. At first he saw only junk. Old newspapers, a torn shoe, a piece of cloth. But then he noticed something strange. The top box was slightly moving, just a little, like something underneath had shifted. Mark's breath caught. He turned off his flashlight for a second and listened. The sound came again, a faint, muffled tap. He turned the light back on. "Hello?" he called softly, trying not to startle whoever or whatever was there. "This is the police. Is someone there?" No response. Rex barked once, short and sharp. That was enough for Mark. He radioed in again. "This is Officer Reynolds. We may have located something." Requesting backup at 5th and Alder. As he waited, he kept the light steady on the boxes. Rex stood in front, tense but not moving forward, as if protecting Mark from crossing a line. The minutes felt like hours. Every small noise made Mark's muscles tighten. He could hear the distant hum of a car, the faint whisper of the wind, and Rex's slow breathing. Then, somewhere deeper in the shadows, a metallic clink echoed, like something being dropped. Mark's heart raced. "Rex, stay," he whispered. But Rex's eyes were already locked in the direction of the sound. The dog's instincts were sharper than any human's. He was waiting, watching, calculating. The radio came alive again. "Backup's on the way, ETA 3 minutes." Mark nodded to himself, never taking his eyes off the darkness. 3 minutes felt too long. Something was happening here, something that made even a brave K9 freeze. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet moment was just the beginning of one of the most unforgettable nights of his career. The kind of night that would later make every officer in Cedar Ridge believe in the power of instinct, and the courage of one remarkable dog who sensed danger before anyone else could. Rex's body was still tense, and his nose pointed toward the far end of the alley. The dim streetlight behind them cast long shadows on the walls, making everything look more mysterious. Officer Mark Reynolds could feel his heartbeat rising. He trusted Rex's instincts more than anything else in the world, and right now those instincts were saying that something was not right. The air in the alley felt cold and heavy. Mark could see the fog swirling near the ground, and the sound of dripping water echoed softly from a pipe somewhere. The silence felt louder than noise. Rex's tail was stiff, his ears flicking in small movements as if he was trying to catch a sound Mark could not hear. "All right, boy," Mark whispered, tightening his grip on the flashlight. "Let's see what's got your attention." He took a slow step forward, and Rex followed, walking silently but alert. The flashlight beam moved slowly across the cracked walls, over broken crates and across a few old trash bins. Mark's eyes caught every little detail: a torn shoe, a half-empty bottle, a torn newspaper with dates from years ago. But nothing looked out of place. Nothing explained why Rex had stopped. Suddenly, Rex froze again and let out a low growl. His head turned sharply toward the left side of the alley, where a narrow gap between two old buildings led into deeper darkness. Mark aimed his flashlight there, but it didn't help much. The gap was too tight and shadowed. "Rex, what is it?" he said softly. Rex didn't move. His breathing quickened slightly. Then he sniffed the air hard and gave a single sharp bark. That bark sent a chill through Mark. It wasn't a warning bark. It was a signal, a call that meant something alive was there. Mark stepped closer, shining his light into the gap. He couldn't see far, just the rough brick walls and a few wet boxes stacked near the end. The air smelled strange, like old dust mixed with something metallic. Rex started pulling the leash lightly, urging Mark forward. "Easy, buddy," Mark whispered, feeling both cautious and curious. They moved a few steps closer. That's when Mark heard it, a faint tapping sound. It was slow and uneven, like someone lightly knocking on wood. He turned off the flashlight and listened carefully. Tap, tap, silence. Then again, tap, tap. Mark's pulse quickened. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice calm but firm. "This is the police. If you can hear me, say something." There was no answer, only the sound of the wind brushing against the walls. Rex sniffed again, then started moving toward the sound. His nose went straight to a large box lying on its side. Mark watched him closely. Rex sniffed around it, then gave a short bark and pawed at the box. Mark knelt down and shone the flashlight again. The box was heavy, filled with old newspapers and pieces of cardboard. But something about it looked wrong. The papers weren't settled naturally. They were pushed up from the inside like something or someone had moved beneath them. Mark slowly pushed the papers aside with his gloved hand. The beam of light followed his movement, and then for a split second he saw it, a small, pale hand sticking out from under the pile. He froze. The sight sent a jolt through him. "Oh my God," he whispered. Rex barked again, louder this time, his voice echoing down the alley. Mark immediately reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reynolds. I have a possible person found unconscious in the alley near 5th and Alder, requesting immediate medical assistance and backup." "Copy that, Officer Reynolds," the voice on the radio replied. "Backup en route. Hold position." Mark turned back to the box and began carefully moving the rest of the debris away. His heart was pounding, but he stayed calm. Underneath the layers of paper was a young boy, maybe 8 years old. His clothes were dirty and there were marks on his wrist like he had been tied up. His eyes were closed, but Mark could see his chest rising and falling. He was breathing, weak but alive. "Hey, buddy," Mark said softly, kneeling beside him. "You're okay now. You're safe." He checked for a pulse. It was faint but steady. He pulled out his small first aid pack and covered the boy with a blanket from his car. Rex stayed close, standing guard beside them. Then all of a sudden, Rex's ears perked up. He turned his head sharply toward the end of the alley again and began growling. It wasn't just a random growl, and it was protective, urgent. Mark looked up, following Rex's gaze. The darkness at the end of the alley seemed to shift. It was subtle, but it was there in a flicker of movement. Someone was out there, watching. Mark stood slowly, shining his flashlight again, but the beam caught only fog and walls. "Who's there?" he called out firmly. "Police, to step out now!" No answer. But Rex's growling got louder. His tail was stiff and his eyes locked onto the far corner. Mark could feel it too, the presence of someone hiding just beyond the light. His instinct screamed that whoever was there didn't want to be found. He stepped back slowly, keeping one hand on his holster and one hand on the radio. "Dispatch," he said quietly. "I believe there's another person in the alley. Possible suspect. Advise backup to approach from both ends." "Copy that," the voice answered. "Units are 2 minutes away." Rex barked again, this time in short, sharp bursts, warning the hidden figure. Then from deep in the shadows a sound broke the silence. The sound of quick footsteps running away. Mark reacted instantly. "Rex, stay," he ordered. He didn't want to risk losing the boy's safety. The footsteps faded into the night, followed by the sound of something metal falling over in the distance. Whoever it was, they were getting away fast. Within moments, flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of the alley. Backup officers arrived and rushed in. 2 paramedics quickly began checking the boy's condition while Mark briefed the other officers. "He's alive," Mark said, his voice low but steady. "Found under these boxes. There's someone else, probably the one who left him here." Rex picked up the scent. They ran toward the west side. The officers nodded and began spreading out to search. Rex kept sniffing the air, still alert. One of the officers came closer and patted Rex gently. "Good work, boy. You're a hero tonight." Mark watched as the medics lifted the boy carefully onto a stretcher. The child's face was pale but peaceful now, as if he knew he was safe. As they carried him away, Mark looked down at Rex, who sat quietly beside him now, tail slowly wagging. "You did it again, partner," he said softly. "You saved someone." Rex tilted his head slightly as if he understood. The fog began to lift and the sounds of the night returned, the distant hum of cars, the whisper of the wind. But for Mark, that moment stayed frozen. He knew they had just uncovered something dark, and that the person who ran away might not be done yet. He looked down the alley one more time before heading back to the car. "We'll find them, Rex," he whispered. "We'll find the one who did this." And as the police lights disappeared into the night, the alley grew quiet again, hiding its secrets in the dark mist. But not for long. The truth was about to come out, and it would send shivers down everyone's spine who heard what really happened there. The night grew colder as the police cars surrounded the alley. Their flashing lights painted red and blue streaks across the wet walls, and the quiet hum of radios filled the air. Officer Mark Reynolds stood near the corner, watching the paramedics lift the young boy into the ambulance. The boy's small hand hung limp at his side, his face pale but peaceful. Mark exhaled deeply, feeling both relief and worry. Whoever had done this was still out there. Rex stood beside him, alert but calm. The German shepherd's nose twitched every few seconds, as if he was still tracking the strange scent from the alley. Mark patted his head gently. "Good boy," he whispered. "You did great tonight." But Rex didn't relax. His ears kept turning toward the far end of the alley, the direction where the shadow had disappeared earlier. One of the backup officers, a young man named Jason, walked over. "We checked the back streets," he said. "No one in sight. Just footprints. They lead toward the old railway yard." Mark nodded. "That place again," he murmured. The railway yard had been abandoned for years, a place only stray cats and troublemakers dared to enter. "We'll check it after we finish the report here." Jason frowned. "You think this is connected to the missing child case from last week?" Mark looked back toward the ambulance as it drove away. "It's too early to say," he replied quietly. "But something tells me this isn't random. Rex sensed danger before we even saw the boy. There's more to this." As the team packed up, Mark stayed behind for a few minutes. The fog hung heavy again, curling around the streetlights. He crouched near the box where they had found the boy. There were faint marks on the ground, like someone had dragged something heavy before stacking the boxes. He traced the marks with his gloved hand, thinking. Whoever had hidden the boy had known this place well. Rex suddenly let out a low growl. Mark looked up. The dog's eyes were fixed on a fence behind the dumpster, the same spot where the figure had slipped away earlier. Mark stood slowly and shone his flashlight there. The light revealed something he hadn't noticed before. A torn piece of fabric stuck on the sharp edge of the fence. He moved closer, careful not to step on the muddy footprints nearby. The fabric was dark, maybe from a jacket or hoodie. He pulled out a plastic evidence bag and carefully placed it inside. "Good eyes, buddy," he said softly to Rex. "Looks like you found our first clue." By morning, the sun had begun to rise over Cedar Ridge. The golden light replaced the eerie darkness, but the feeling in Mark's chest didn't fade. He hadn't been able to sleep. After filing his report, he sat in the quiet station with a cup of coffee, staring at the small piece of fabric sealed in evidence tape. Detective Laura Stevens, his supervisor, walked in. "You look like you didn't go home," she said, sitting across from him. "I couldn't," Mark replied. "That boy, if we had arrived even an hour later." Laura nodded slowly. "The doctors say he's stable. He's still unconscious, but he'll recover." Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Good," he said softly. "Did he have any ID?" "No," Laura said. "But we checked missing persons. There's a family who reported their son missing 3 days ago. Age description, it matches. They're on their way to the hospital to confirm." Mark rubbed his forehead. "So that means he was kept somewhere for days before being left in that alley." Laura's eyes narrowed. "Yes, and whoever did it knew what they were doing. No fingerprints, no clear shoe marks. It's like they've done this before." Before Mark could answer, Rex, who was lying beside the desk, suddenly lifted his head and gave a soft bark. His ears perked up and he stood, sniffing toward the door. "What's wrong with him?" Laura asked. Mark smiled slightly. "He smells something familiar." Just then, Officer Jason entered, holding a small paper bag. "Morning. Forensics just finished with the fabric. There's a trace of motor oil and metal dust on it, the kind you find around old train machinery. So, you were right. The suspect might be hiding at the railway yard." Laura leaned forward. "That's our lead, then." Mark stood up immediately. "Let's go. Rex is ready." By noon, Mark, Laura, and 2 more officers arrived at the railway yard. The place was silent, with rows of rusting train cars and broken sheds covered in weeds. The air smelled of old iron and wet dirt. Rex walked ahead, his leash loose but his head low, sniffing the ground. His tail moved slowly, a sign he was tracking something. They moved between 2 large freight cars, the metal walls echoing their footsteps. Mark kept his voice low. "Stay close. The suspect might still be here." Rex suddenly stopped and sniffed a patch of ground near one of the sheds. He let out a short bark and began scratching at the dirt. Mark knelt down and brushed away some dust. Beneath it, he found footprints, and fresh ones. "He's been here," Mark said. "Maybe only hours ago." Laura pointed toward the shed. "Let's check inside." The door creaked as they pushed it open. The inside was dim and filled with old tools, ropes, and oil drums. Rex sniffed the air and began to move toward the far corner. There, under a pile of rags, was a small backpack. Mark opened it carefully. Inside were a few candy wrappers, a child's toy car, and a torn piece of notebook paper. The paper had something scribbled in shaky handwriting. "Don't tell anyone." "Be quiet." The sight made everyone pause. Whoever they were chasing had tried to silence the boy, maybe threatened him before abandoning him. Laura's expression hardened. "We're dealing with someone dangerous. But they're slipping. They left clues this time." Rex sniffed around the shed again and barked at a side door that led outside. When Mark opened it, they found a narrow trail leading toward the forest behind the tracks. The officers followed quietly, the leaves crunching under their boots. Rex moved faster now, tugging at the leash. The trail wound through trees and rocks until it ended at a small wooden cabin hidden between tall grass. Mark exchanged a look with Laura. "That place isn't on the property." "Records," he whispered. They approached carefully. The windows were covered, and smoke rose faintly from a metal pipe sticking out of the roof. Someone had been here recently. Mark motioned for the others to take positions. He stepped to the front door, Rex beside him, and knocked firmly. "Police, is anyone inside?" For a few seconds there was silence. Then a faint sound came from inside. Footsteps. Mark tightened his grip on Rex's leash. "Come out with your hands where we can see them," he called again. The door opened slowly, creaking loudly. A man in a dark hoodie appeared. His face was pale and tired, and his eyes darted nervously from side to side. I didn't do anything," he stammered. Mark looked at him closely. His jacket was torn, a piece missing from the sleeve, the same fabric they had found on the fence. "Sir," Mark said calmly, "step outside. We need to ask you some questions." But before the man could move, Rex barked sharply and pulled forward, his nose twitching as he sniffed the man's jacket. He growled softly. The scent matched. The man's eyes widened, and suddenly he turned and ran. "Stop! Police!" Mark shouted, taking off after him. The chase began through the thick grass, with Rex leading the way. The man stumbled once, trying to climb a fence, but Rex leapt ahead, cutting him off. Mark reached him seconds later and pulled him down safely, handcuffing him while catching his breath. "Not so fast," Mark said quietly. "We've been looking for you." The man refused to speak at first, only staring at the ground. But when they searched the cabin, they found evidence: rope, old blankets, and several small items that belonged to children. Rex sat outside the cabin, panting but alert as the other officers took the man away. Mark knelt beside his partner, scratching his neck softly. "You did it again, buddy," he said with a tired smile. "You led us right to him." Rex wagged his tail once and rested his head against Mark's knee. The long night had finally begun to make sense. What they had uncovered in that dark alley wasn't just luck. It was the instinct of a loyal dog and the teamwork that saved a child's life. Rain started to fall as the officers loaded the suspect into the back of the patrol car. The clouds hung low and gray, and the sound of raindrops tapping on the roof of the old cabin echoed through the quiet forest. Officer Mark Reynolds stood near the doorway, watching as Rex shook off the water from his fur. The dog looked tired but alert, his eyes following every movement of the man in the hoodie. Even now, Rex didn't relax. His instincts told him this wasn't over. Detective Laura Stevens walked up beside Mark, holding a small notebook. "We'll bring him to the station for questioning," she said. "He's the only lead we have. Hopefully he'll tell us something about the boy." Mark nodded. "The evidence we found inside should be enough to connect him." "Rope, toys, even that note. It all points to him," Laura sighed. "I hope so, but something feels off. Why leave the boy alive? Why leave him where someone might find him?" Mark didn't answer right away. He looked out at the rain-soaked trees. "Maybe he panicked," he said finally. "Or maybe Rex scared him off." Rex wagged his tail once, as if understanding. Laura smiled faintly. "If that's the case, your partner here deserves a steak dinner." Mark chuckled softly. "He always does." The team packed up their equipment and began to leave. But just as they reached the cars, Rex turned his head sharply and started barking. Loud, urgent barks that echoed through the trees. Mark's heart jumped. "Rex, what is it?" he said, immediately turning back. Rex ran toward the side of the cabin, nose pressed to the ground, following something. Mark followed quickly, flashlight in hand. Behind the cabin, the mud showed two sets of footprints, one larger, one smaller. The smaller ones looked fresh, as if made only hours ago. Laura caught up, frowning. "Those aren't ours," Mark crouched down. "These could belong to the boy," he said, studying the shape carefully. "Or maybe another child." A chill ran through the group. Could there be another victim? Mark stood and looked back toward the suspect sitting in the police car. He wasn't working alone, he said firmly. There's someone else out here. Without wasting time, the officers fanned out and began searching the area around the cabin. Rex led the way, moving with precision, nose close to the ground, tail straight. The rain made it harder, washing away some scents, but Rex didn't stop. He barked once and headed deeper into the trees. The forest grew darker as clouds thickened overhead. The sound of thunder rolled in the distance. Mark followed Rex, his flashlight cutting through the mist. They moved for several minutes before Rex suddenly stopped near a fallen tree. He began digging at the wet ground. Something there? Mark asked. Rex barked softly. Mark knelt and brushed away some leaves. There, half covered in mud, was a small metal chain bracelet. It was the kind children wore, tiny with the name Ethan engraved on it. Mark's stomach tightened. That's not the same boy's name, he whispered. Laura's voice came over the radio. Mark, do you copy? He pressed the button. Yeah, we found something. Another child's bracelet. It's not the same name. We might have a second victim. There was a pause on the other end. Then Laura replied, her tone serious. Understood. Keep searching. I'll contact missing persons. Mark slipped the bracelet into an evidence bag and stood up. Rex looked up at him, ears perked. Good job, buddy, he said softly. Let's keep going. They searched for another half hour, moving deeper into the forest. Then, as lightning flashed across the sky, Rex started barking again, sharp, insistent barks that echoed far. Mark followed quickly, his heart pounding. Ahead, through the trees, he saw an old wooden shack, half collapsed and covered in moss. Rex ran straight to the door and began scratching at it. Mark reached out, grabbed the handle, and pushed. It was stuck. He shoved it again, harder this time, until it creaked open. Inside was darkness. The air smelled of damp wood and old smoke. Mark turned on his flashlight. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. The small room was empty except for a few broken chairs and an old lantern. But on the wall, pinned under a rusty nail, was a piece of paper. Written in shaky handwriting were the words, "You found one. You won't find the rest." Mark's breath caught. He immediately radioed Laura. We've got a note here. Looks like a threat. The suspect might have a partner still hiding in the area. Copy that, Laura replied. We'll alert nearby units. Stay put until backup arrives. But Mark didn't want to wait. He knew that every minute mattered if another child was involved. He looked down at Rex, whose nose was still twitching. The dog barked softly and looked toward a narrow path behind the shack. You smell something, don't you? Mark said. Rex wagged his tail once and started walking toward it. They followed the path quietly, the forest around them silent except for the rain. The trail twisted and narrowed until it opened into a small clearing. There at the center was a half-buried wooden crate. Mark's pulse quickened. He knelt beside it and brushed off the wet soil. The crate looked old but recently moved. Rex sniffed it and barked again. Dispatch, this is Reynolds, Mark said into the radio. We found something buried near the old shack. Requesting backup immediately. Static answered for a second, then, copy that. Units are on the way. Mark grabbed a small shovel from his pack and began digging carefully around the crate. It took several minutes, his hands shaking slightly as mud splashed onto his uniform. Finally, he managed to pry the lid open. Inside were small items, a few toys, a shoe, a piece of cloth. But no person. It looked like belongings collected and hidden. Mark stared in silence, realizing what this meant. Someone had been keeping trophies, reminders of what they had done. He swallowed hard. This wasn't just one man, he said softly to himself. There's another one out there. Maybe worse. Rex barked again, drawing his attention to the edge of the clearing. Mark shone his flashlight there and saw movement and a figure slipping behind the trees. Stop. Police, Mark shouted, running after the shadow. Rex bolted ahead, barking furiously. The chase was fast and chaotic, branches snapping underfoot. The figure ran down the slope, stumbling once but never stopping. Mark followed as closely as he could, his breath short and rain soaking through his clothes. The shadow darted left, trying to disappear into the woods, but Rex's instincts were faster. The dog lunged forward and cut him off, barking loudly. The man turned, startled. His face was half covered by a scarf, but his eyes widened in fear when he saw the police badge. Mark raised his voice. On the ground, now! The man hesitated, then made a quick move as if to run again, but Rex leapt forward, grabbing his sleeve and pulling him down. Mark rushed over, pinning the man to the ground and handcuffing him. Not this time, Mark said firmly, breathing hard. When they pulled the scarf from the man's face, Mark felt a jolt of shock. It was the same man from earlier, the one already in custody. He had escaped from the car during transport, leading them straight into the woods again. How did he? Laura's voice came through the radio just as Mark realized. The first officer guarding him had been attacked when the man broke free. They quickly brought the suspect back under control, this time chaining him securely. The other officers arrived minutes later, muddy and exhausted. Laura looked at the crate, then at Mark. "You did good work," she said softly. "And Rex, he saved us again." Mark knelt beside his partner and rubbed his neck gently. Rex panted, his tail wagging slowly, his fur soaked from the rain. "Couldn't have done it without you," Mark whispered. The team searched the area until sunrise. They found traces of more evidence, enough to connect the man to several missing child cases from nearby towns. Every clue pointed back to this forest and the two cabins. As dawn broke, the sky turned a pale gold, and the forest grew quiet again. The nightmare of the night had finally ended. Mark looked down at Rex, who was lying beside him, eyes half closed but peaceful. "You can rest now, buddy," he said softly. "You've done your part." And for the first time since the dark alley, Mark felt a sense of calm. The danger had passed, and at least for now. But deep inside, he knew this case would stay with him forever. It was not just about catching a criminal. It was about the unspoken bond between a man and his dog, and how one animal's instincts saved more lives than anyone could count. Morning light slowly spread over Cedar Ridge as the rain clouds drifted away. The forest that had looked frightening at night now seemed peaceful and calm, though the muddy ground still showed the marks of everything that happened. Police cars were parked along the narrow dirt road, their flashing lights dim in the daylight. Officers moved around quietly, collecting evidence and packing equipment. The storm had passed, but the air still carried a heavy feeling. Officer Mark Reynolds stood beside his patrol car, holding a towel as he dried Rex's wet fur. The German Shepherd leaned against his leg, tired but calm. Rex had been awake all night, leading the team through rain, darkness, and danger. Now his eyes looked softer, as if he finally understood the work was done. Detective Laura Stevens approached with 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Mark. "You should sit for a while," she said kindly. "You've been on your feet since yesterday evening." Mark took the cup with a faint smile. "Thanks, I'm fine. Just glad it's over." Laura nodded and looked down at Rex. "He's something special." "You both are." Mark patted Rex gently. "He always knows before I do. If it wasn't for him, we would have never found that boy or the cabin or the crate." Laura sighed and looked toward the clearing where officers were still working. It's strange, isn't it? How one small sign, a dog stopping in an alley, can uncover so much darkness. Mark nodded quietly. It started as just another call. But that night Rex froze for a reason. He felt something none of us could. They both stood in silence for a moment. The forest was peaceful now. Birds began to sing, and the faint sunlight touched the leaves. After all the chaos and fear, it felt almost unreal to stand there and hear something as simple as morning sounds. By noon, the suspect had been taken back into custody under tighter security. The officers confirmed that he was connected to several missing child reports from nearby towns. Inside the second cabin, investigators found enough evidence to close multiple unsolved cases. The discovery shocked everyone in Cedar Ridge. At the station later that day, news reporters gathered outside, eager to talk to the hero team. But Mark wasn't comfortable with cameras or fame. He stayed inside with Rex, sitting quietly in the K9 room. Rex was lying on a blanket, half asleep, his chest rising and falling slowly. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhausted but thoughtful. He kept replaying the events of the past night in his head. The moment Rex froze, the faint tapping sound, the discovery of the boy, the chase through the forest. Every detail reminded him how close things had been. When Detective Laura entered the room, she smiled. "The media's calling Rex a hero," she said. "They want to take pictures for tomorrow's front page." Mark chuckled softly. "He deserves it. But he doesn't care about pictures. He only cares about doing his job." Laura sat beside him. "You know, not every officer listens to their dog like you do. Most would have thought Rex was just reacting to noise. But you trusted him." Mark looked at Rex, his eyes softening. "He's never wrong." "I've learned that the hard way." Every time he acts strange, there's always a reason, Laura smiled. Well, this time his instinct saved a life, and maybe more than one. Later in the afternoon, the boy they had rescued woke up at the hospital. The doctor said he was weak but recovering quickly. Mark visited quietly, not wanting to disturb him. When he entered the room, the boy's parents were already there, holding his hand. The mother looked up as Mark walked in and immediately stood, tears filling her eyes. "You're Officer Reynolds, aren't you?" she asked softly. Mark nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She stepped forward and hugged him suddenly, her voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you for bringing our son back." Mark felt a lump in his throat. "It wasn't just me," he said, looking down at Rex, who sat beside him, calm and polite. "My partner here found him. He wouldn't stop until we did." The little boy turned his head slowly toward Rex. His voice was weak, but he smiled faintly. "That's the dog from the alley," he whispered. Mark knelt beside the bed and nodded. "Yes, his name's Rex. He stayed with you until help came." The boy reached out a trembling hand and Rex gently placed his nose against it, wagging his tail softly. The boy smiled, his eyes closing again as if comforted just by the touch. The doctor stepped forward and said quietly, "He'll be all right. He just needs rest and care." Mark nodded and stood. That's all I needed to hear. Outside the hospital, the air smelled fresh after the rain. Reporters were still waiting, cameras flashing, but Mark walked past them quietly. For him, the job wasn't about praise or attention. It was about the promise he made every time he put on his badge, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That evening, the Cedar Ridge Police Department held a small ceremony. Officers, families, and local residents gathered in front of the station to honor Rex's bravery. The chief of police stepped forward with a shiny medal and smiled proudly. "Tonight we honor K-9 Officer Rex for his courage, loyalty, and service to our community," he said loudly. "Because of his instincts, a young boy is alive and justice will be served." Applause filled the air as the chief placed the medal around Rex's collar. Cameras flashed, children clapped, and people cheered. But Rex, being a humble dog, only wagged his tail and looked up at Mark as if to say, "Can we go home now?" Mark laughed softly and scratched Rex's ears. "You did great, partner. Let's go get you something to eat." Later, when the crowd left and the night grew quiet again, Mark sat with Rex outside the station. The streetlights glowed softly and the air was cool. He thought about how easily things could have gone differently that night. If Rex hadn't stopped in that alley, the boy might never have been found. He looked down at his loyal friend. "You know, buddy," he said quietly, "sometimes I think you understand more about people than we do." Rex tilted his head slightly, listening. His eyes were calm and warm. Mark smiled. "You don't just see danger, you feel it. You knew something was wrong long before I did, and you didn't give up." Rex wagged his tail and rested his head on Mark's lap. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The city around them was peaceful again, but Mark knew the memory of that night would stay with him forever. It wasn't just about solving a case or making an arrest. It was about trust, the kind that exists only between a man and his partner, between a heart that speaks in words and another that speaks in instinct. Weeks passed, and the case finally came to a close. The man they caught in the woods confessed everything. His partner was also found and brought to justice. The news of the rescue spread far beyond Cedar Ridge, and letters of gratitude poured into the station. Many were addressed to Rex. Mark often smiled when he opened them. Children sent drawings of a brave German shepherd wearing a medal. Families wrote words of thanks, saying how safe they felt knowing officers like Mark and Rex were out there. But the greatest reward came one afternoon when the boy and his parents visited the station. The boy ran up to Rex, his laughter filling the room. "I told my friends about you," he said proudly, hugging Rex's neck. "You're my hero." Rex wagged his tail and licked the boy's cheek gently. Mark felt his eyes sting with emotion but smiled through it. As the family left, Mark looked at his partner and said softly, "You changed a life. Rex, that's something no medal can ever match." That night, as they drove through the quiet streets of Cedar Ridge, the same alley came into view, the one where everything began. Mark slowed the car and looked down the dark path. It was silent now, empty except for the soft glow of a street lamp. Rex looked out the window, ears twitching. For a moment, Mark imagined the scene from that night. The fog, the stillness, the moment Rex froze. He smiled and said, "You knew all along, didn't you?" Rex gave a small bark as if agreeing. Mark laughed softly. Yeah, I thought so. He patted Rex's head. Come on, partner. Time to head home. As they drove away, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. The world outside was quiet and peaceful, and inside the car sat a man and his faithful dog, two partners who had faced the dark together and brought light back to a child's life. And somewhere deep inside, Mark knew that as long as Rex was by his side, no alley, no night, and no mystery would ever truly scare him again.